first keynote today is from Dr. Tim Williams. Dr. Tim Williams is the Chief Executive Officer of the Committee for Sydney, which the Premier recently described as a fantastic organisation challenging the city to be great. Before coming to Australia in late 2010, Tim was recognised as one of the UK's thought leaders in urban regeneration and economic development for his role in developing East London as CEO of the Thames Gateway London Partnership, where he helped secure the Olympics for Stratford. He also served as a special advisor on urban development, governance, city strategy and planning to 5 successive UK cabinet ministers and to the Mayor of London. That's a challenge in its own right. Please welcome Tim to the stage. Thank you.
I'm going to see how I can juggle all these things, actually. Can you hear me? Yeah. And let's move to... Can we move to... Got my slides up? Thank you for welcoming me. I was actually at that conference that the Prime Minister launched the Smart Cities document, and I was one of the speakers there because I helped draft elements of it. My very ungrammatical and very long title needs an ED at the end of it, but I'm going to talk about big city, small data, i.e. big data may be the issue, but we've got a problem in Australian cities around governance and around the public sector partnership around smart cities. Our challenge is not the clever technologists or the private sector. In my view, there's a governance gap around smart cities, and it needs to be sorted, and it's not easy, and I want to talk about that. And then I think that's the Australian challenge. I also wanted to say that one of the myths about innovation is that it's all to do with the private sector. And it's a myth we all want to believe because we're all brilliant individualists, and you can read the biography of Steve Jobs recently without seeing one line in there about the role that the public sector played in creating almost all the content of the smartphone that he is associated with through the defence procurement route. And our friend in Tesla has been the recipient of $500 million soft loans from the American government. And so we mustn't let government off the hook because they have a big role to play in innovation actually. I've just been doing some stuff about how to make Sydney work better. It's really worth looking at. It's free on the Committee for Sydney website. It's about demand management, road pricing. Perhaps the most intelligent infrastructure that Sydney needs is no new infrastructure, but to actually rationally use the stuff that we've got through technology and through road pricing. And that seemed to have got a bit of an audience. And I didn't get killed by the road minister, which is my annual problem. But although there's still some time before the end of the week. So that's interesting, and I think the committee's done a lot of work, obviously, about cities, but the title tells you quite a lot about our perspective. Business-led, with kind of Cisco and Microsoft and PwC and big global companies, but progressive, thinking about equity issues within the city, adding to the dividend of Sydney, yes, but ending the divide of Sydney. And I'm going to say a little bit about some of Sydney's challenges that we need innovation from you to solve, actually. But we've also done this thing called We the City, which I did with Cisco, and We the City says everything. How do we get the data-driven, responsive city, right? When we've got governance problems that other cities in the world don't have. We've got 41 small councils, remember, and siloed state government and complex governance arrangements. These are holding us back, in my view, right? So we've done a bit of that, and we also played a role in creating the FinTech Hub, Stone and Chalk, which actually did require some private collaboration to create, but also public-private collaboration to create. But it's a great thing, and you can have a look at our stuff on the website. I personally did this thing 4.5 years ago for Huawei called Connecting Communities, and I was such a novice to this thing. I mean, there was loads of errors in this thing because I wasn't a geek. And I once wrote that this stuff was too important to be left to the geeks. And I got an email at 3 o'clock in the morning from somebody saying, I'm a proud geek and I'm going to come round and mash you up. But I've also done a bit of work. How is this possible? But Coffs Harbour, I wrote their strategy for, which meant that they're in the top intelligent communities on the planet. That's a debatable title, in my view. And I did some work in the regions around digital strategy. So I have an interest in this digital agenda. And I also came up with this, I stole this phrase from a friend of mine, but if only Sydney knew what Sydney knows. That's our challenge. We've got massive things going on out there, but we don't know very much about them. We're not actually managing the city from a data perspective in any way that I can see. Okay, so we've got, I think, a long road to go, but we can get there. But I think there's a big discussion to be had about the governance around small cities. We need better public sector partners, better public sector clients, seriously, to do this thing properly. And I'm going to talk about some of the cities that I've been to or come across that I think have really got the public sector part of it nailed. I also am kind of interested in what you can do about this problem, which is anybody who's ever done anything with government is that they do all this stuff. They identify the solutions, they create all the answers, and they come to the private sector the day before and said, can you support us? Instead of doing what we should be doing, which is obviously involving community in the private sector earlier in the shaping of what the problem is in the first place. And I'm kind of optimistic that on digital platforms we can do a lot more of this kind of inclusive we the city shaping. But you've got to have a political will to do it. Let's talk about that. Problems of Sydney are the flip side of its great opportunities. Wealthiest city in Australia, pumping away 23% of national GDP, heavily skewed wealth production to obviously the CBD, but most people live in the flat bits, so getting people to the wealth making is a bit of a problem. Jobs and homes are in entirely different places. If you live within 10 kilometres of the CBD, for every 10 people they can access 8 jobs, and if you live 20 kilometres away it's 3 jobs. So we've got this big job homes imbalance. That's a big problem. And actually, health indicators are following that wealth divide within Sydney, so the southwest is particularly disadvantaged. So we've got some issues. This is why cities are important and why the feds are talking about them again. Is the blue is Sydney's performance. When the nation really was only doing 2.5% GDP, Sydney went up 4% in a year in 2014 and is still doing very well. And it's professional and financial services and ICT that is driving the Sydney boat upwards and dragging a lot of ships up with it. It's not either or. We're creating a lot of momentum in these sectors for other and for blue collar workers as well. And this is like the most important political slide you will see, which is that Sydney's financial services alone contribute the same to national GDP as Western Australian mining. In fact, they surpass it this year. So it's a city that matters with a bunch of industries that matter. So we do quite well in these we do very well in some of these global competitions, but we do very poorly on infrastructure and transport, public transport. And global talent is beginning to tell us this because they've been around the place. And so this is good pressure to bring public transport transformation. So we've got some of these problems of growth, high cost infrastructure investment, social cohesion and integration, I think is a real problem. Sprawl, we invented it in Sydney, and congestion. So these problems can kill us, and unless we solve some of these problems. Now, the feds are shifting, and I'm going to go now, the next bit is really about the smart city stuff. So this is what Malcolm Turnbull said when he did that historic first speech, when he talked about cities in his first speech. We often overlook the fact that livable cities, efficient, productive cities, are economic assets. Managing them, making them sure they're wonderful places to live is a priority of every level of government. So making Sydney work better is a national priority from this perspective. How to do so in a digital era, I think, is what we're into. Now, that scrappy, bearded person is me in Barcelona about a month ago, I suppose. I was knocked out, actually. It was 90,000 people went there, and I didn't know that. And I've seen the future, and it works, but boy, did I come away thinking the private sector is way out there in terms of what it's developing. I didn't really see many public sector clients there at all. So the stuff I was seeing, I felt there was a dissonance, between this amazing stuff that's going on in the Internet of Things and virtual reality. But what's the link up? And there are particular, I think, challenges in the Australian discussion about that link up. And I'm going to talk about that. It's great, and that's a future meeting of the City Council. So great things outside the hall. And I know it's boring when people say great things about Barcelona or a Scandinavian city, but it is true. So obviously they started a few years back. They've got an Internet of Things strategy, great partnering with the private sector. There's a council that covers 1.5 million people not 200,000 people like the city of Sydney. It covers, you know, a quarter or third of the area of the metropolitan area. Loads of programs around what you'd think they would have: transportation, water, energy, waste. The strategy they've got fantastic cable fiber network they put in 30 years ago, and they're doing Wi-Fi all over the place. Smart metering, smart bins, all that stuff we know about. Smart street lights, the whole caboodle. And they're not doing just little prototyping and just one-offs. They're doing a lot of stuff. And they're looking at it from a, not just, oh, that's interesting, but from a data analytical, can we use this data to manage our city? So the smart thing to do is to manage your city in response to this stuff. We would find that very difficult. We may have one council do it, and then they could learn from that experience, but scaling it up and making it happen across the metropolitan area of Sydney, nobody knows how to do that at this point in time. So digital bus stops, it's getting a bit boring actually, but smart parking spaces, all this stuff we read about other cities doing. They've been collecting a lot of the good ideas and doing this stuff. Water usage, all that stuff. They've got open data, open source platforms. They're inviting people in to bring their own data onto this platform to solve problems. You know, the whole democratic as well as efficient government thing across 1.5 million people. And the community engagement is just best in class. And we've got the good news, I think, in Sydney, the Greater Sydney Commission, which we helped as a Committee for Sydney create, which is a new body to bring government together across Sydney, is very into the digital universe, is developing a digital dashboard for Sydney. So there is some sign of life out there, I think. The results are you know, savings left, right, and centre. And startups are using the data. I'm a big fan that this isn't all about just improved government, but creating new business for SMEs if you get the procurement right, which I'm going to talk about at the end. Because procurement eats innovation for lunch is the real problem with public sector procurement. So the smartest thing about Barcelona is actually it covers a big part of the metropolitan area. But this is where the crunch of the challenge I think we should set Australian governments. Why is Chicago good? I'll do a little bit about Chicago now. There is the political will and the organizational structure. Do we have the political will? Do we have the right governance structures? How do we do smart cities without these things? And the feds are getting interested in this. They know this is a gap. And they're trying to use their city's policy to incentivize better collaborations across cities and between public and private sector. That's something to hold on to. This fractured government, 9 councils down Parramatta Road, right? That's not smart government before we get to smart cities, right? So, Barcelona not alone, Dubai plan, leading, you know, obviously lots of the stuff we know about, Wi-Fi hotspots. Singapore's got a national plan, national platform, very great digital fiber structure, but also they're working through how you make government more interactive and learn from the data. And even Kansas City, which I can tell you is not in a much better shape than when Dorothy was there, is actually doing not just a light rail project. We're doing a light rail project, but we're not doing what they're doing, which is putting sensors down it and making a whole kind of learning corridor of the usual stuff of, you know, LED sensor screens, wireless internet, cameras, learning from this 2-mile infrastructure. So it becomes not just a transport kit, but a city transformation vehicle. We're just not bringing together these things in a smart way. We are putting billions into infrastructure, but we haven't thought yet to do that coming together of the sensors with the light rail down George Street. We're not doing that. So I just think it's let me just finish one. Okay, so if you want to know the best, I think the best city that's doing the best work, digital inclusion, infrastructure, changing business models, delivering public sector transformation, Chicago, 311. You just literally take a photograph of a stolen car, you email it in, and they tell you in real time what's going on and how many cars were stolen in that ward that week. So we've got a gap. We've got these guys doing brilliant stuff. We've got Windy Grid, which is a great platform. Somebody said this and the array of things in Chicago is a Fitbit for the city. Is a Fitbit for the city. Just even thinking about it that way is a great idea. we're not doing enough of this stuff. We've got bits of it. We've got some cities doing stuff. Parramatta's trying to do some stuff. The City of Sydney's trying to experiment. It's scaling up the opportunity faster to make a better public sector partner. I'm just going to conclude. They're also using the community to test apps, using actually I'm going into disadvantaged areas to develop the capacity to use digital tools. You know, this is great stuff. This is not rocket science. This is just integrated government with a political will. Amsterdam is just doing, as we know, they've actually got this really innovative idea that you can actually sponsor a Wi-Fi kind of coverage for $400 or something. So you can make your own network. And Reykjavik is asking people to say what kind of government innovation you want. Milton Keynes, which is not the most clever part of the United Kingdom, has got smart bins. Seoul is using platforms to share services and bring people together in all sorts of ways. Honolulu, for God's sake, and Paris is actually asking people to give ideas to transform the city. So, you know, we know what this stuff can do. And it's out there. And it's not about inventing the wheel. It's just about applying this intelligence that has been developed by companies in the room are often doing stuff elsewhere. They need to be brought home to do this stuff. So, to end, this is the opportunity we know. And we know that this is really not just even in prospect, it is happening. You know that cliche, the William Gibson thing, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed, was never more true than in this conversation about smart cities, it seems to me. And I'm doing this as a challenge, right? I'm doing this deliberately to provoke the discussion about what Australia needs to do rather than be complacent because we're not doing certain things, right? So I think renewal of government around this is absolutely essential. I think even listing the 5 things that good councils are doing, visualizing data, savvy intermediaries, governmental platform that works, personalized responses from City Hall, and real-time information. That's quite a good list to ask all our government to really focus on. We know what the data-driven council looks like. Engaged citizen, empowered employee, innovative leadership. Yep. They do partnership well. In Houston, again, you'd never think of it as that innovative, but they've got the university and the city government working together, learning from city analytics to change what the government does. And it's not about potholes anymore, it's about core services, education, healthcare, safe, better streets, using the Internet of Things, not just to report basic sort of infrastructure problems, but to actually tell us about the performance of the city. And then the last bit is procurement sucks. That's a technical term, by the way. It's just that it's pretty broken. In public sector, universally has got a problem with setting the barrier too high and not actually having a research and development approach that the private sector would have, which is to prototype things. We're beginning to see some of this. I think the ACT might be prototyping driverless cars earlier than anybody else, because it can do, because it's a single city government that's got all the tools that it needs to under its belt with no siloed government problem, and it's looking to be ambitious. So I'd watch that one. I think that's a good sign. So I think procurement is an issue. And my last thing to say about this is a positive, which is the Transport for New South Wales. Obviously, people here may have been involved. When they developed their real-time information app, they actually did a hackathon, and it saved millions. That the way they developed this app, we need more and more of that approach to development. And I think, for me, the issue is not, the smart cities thing isn't about technology. The barriers are not technological. There's brilliant stuff in the room. It's how we get smart commissioning of smart cities by our governance structures. And I think the message is that we will miss not just transformational opportunities for our cities, we will miss commercial opportunities, because the fact that Boston is great at delivering public services online is part of it, but it's also commissioning great partnership and contracts for SMEs in technology to help them manage the city. So there are opportunities around this, I think, that we will miss unless we get our act together, our skates on. And the last thing really is a couple of recommendations. It always pains me slightly. I used to work for the UK government, and I'm astonished when they do things like real open data. But I worked for a Labour government that was certainly not going to share data with anybody, right? So when I left, magically, we have a great platform for open data in the UK, but also they're thinking a lot about Internet of Things. They've got a strategy. They've got agencies and institutions and money going in to procuring it. They've got, in the form of London and other new innovations around cities, there's city deals, going to give a lot of resources and devolution to British cities. I think they've got the governance structures that are pretty good at using this kind of stuff as well. We've obviously got signs of life around this stuff, and look out for the Smart City Master Plan. Parramatta and the City of Sydney is doing some stuff. And I think the federal government approach to city policy has got this discussion at its heart, and it wants to see better collaborations to make the cities work better. And I think we need to see something like a national innovation of things strategy from the federal government around this. And I think the last thing is government needs to foster and promote a clear aspiration and vision. Who would disagree with that? We haven't got it. Government has a leadership role to play. It does lots of things in this space. Commissioning, skills and research, data, okay? It could be a far better customer for the Internet of Things and use its buying power to actually set out the direction of travel. It offers a lot of expertise that's being siloed at the moment. And I think standards around openness and stuff we need to be developing in a kind of more national way. Skills, and again, making sure the schools do this kind of stuff. And the last thing is around openness. So I'll end. The provocation was deliberate. I didn't come here just to say things you expected. I want to say the problem for smart cities is a public sector problem, not a private sector problem. Let's figure it out. Thank you very much.